Hi Year 10, it's me again. Over the last couple of weeks we've been reconnecting and checking in with you, so we're going to stick with that theme for the lessons this week whilst you're working at home. So we're going to catch up on what you've been doing since April, what you're doing in the lessons now when you're in college, and how you can use all of it going forward. Okay, when we sent you home at the end of March, we were still in the midst of our unseen poetry unit. So we sent you home with some unseen poetry work. So you were asked to work through the booklet of loads of different unseen poems and some questions to go with them. There were loads of poems in there, so you didn't have to complete all of it. We just asked you to do that until the Easter holidays. So if you completed some of that booklet, well done. Okay, even if you just had a look at one poem. Okay, it will have helped you with your language analysis skills, picking out those words and phrases to think about. It will have helped you with your analysis of poetry. The more you're exposed to poems, the more you practice analysing them, the better you'll be. And therefore that will have prepared you for your English Literature GCSE and the paper 2 of that exam. After the Easter holidays, we gave you a series of lessons, 6 weeks worth of lessons on the play Romeo and Juliet. Now, you will have done some of that at the end of year 9, so you would have been familiar somewhat with the text and based on your kind of prior knowledge and what you know about it anyway. But through those lessons, you were asked to look at the plot, the context, the key characters, the key scenes, the quotations and themes. Okay, and there are a series of different tasks for you to complete throughout that unit, including some quizzes on Educake. Okay, and we asked you to do that until May half term. Okay, so that was 6 weeks worth of work. If you've completed any of that, well done. Okay, that will have helped you with your knowledge of a Shakespeare play. That will have helped you with your knowledge of Elizabethan England, the time that Shakespeare was writing. It will have helped you with your understanding of the language used by Shakespeare. Okay, that can be tricky, so again, the more you're exposed to it, the better. And therefore that will have prepared you for your English Literature GCSE and the Paper 1 exam. And then from the 1st of June, we took you right back to the beginning of year 10 and we asked you to revisit and inspector calls. Now we asked you to revise that through a series of tasks. So we asked you to complete a task every single day. You got to pick the task, and they were all based on a different exam style. So each of the tasks looked at one of those different exam type questions from any of the papers and formed an inspector calls themed task around that. So if you've completed any of these tasks, well done. That will have helped you with your knowledge of an inspector calls. That will have prepared you for your English Literature GCSE in the paper 2, and it will have helped you prepare for your English language exams, okay, and those different exam style questions. As you return to college, the focus of the lesson is going to be your knowledge of Romeo and Juliet. So thinking about that 6 weeks unit between the end of the Easter holidays and the May half term. So we're asking you to revisit that learning or add to your knowledge. And the main focus is exploding some of those key quotations. Okay, so that's a skill that you can use for Romeo and Juliet, but also your other texts as well. So by engaging in that lesson and completing that learning check, you will revisit your online and any previous learning of Romeo and Juliet. You will also identify the gaps in your knowledge, which will help us and yourself to see where we go with our next steps with learning that text. It would have helped your language analysis skills by exploding quotations. And as I said, that's a skill you can use for any of your texts. And therefore it would have helped prepare you for your English Literature GCSE exams. Before we go any further, take a moment to think about how much of the set English work you have completed. We asked you to think about this during your reconnection meetings with your tutor, but have a think about it now. Focus mainly on the Romeo and Juliet unit. If you have not completed the Romeo and Juliet unit, make that your priority for the learning time when you're not in college. So when you're not in college on your set day, be using this time to get through as much as you can of that Romeo and Juliet unit. Okay, it's all on SharePoint, or you can click the link and that will take you to the PowerPoints, and they're also available in video form on YouTube if you're using that way to work instead. Okay, so really think about what you've completed, okay, and have a look through that Romeo and Juliet unit again. If you think you're all up to date and you've completed the unit, can't do any more to it, then use your home learning time to support what you're doing in college, and that's what I'll talk you through next, so keep clicking. So as I said before, whilst you're in college and in your English lessons, we're focusing on this idea of exploding quotations, and that is to help prepare you for your English literature exams. Because before your exams, you need to learn quite a lot of quotations for each of your set texts. So that's an Inspector Calls, Romeo and Juliet, the Power and Conflict Poetry Anthology, and A Christmas Carol. Now, you will need to know quotations for each of those texts going into your exams. But being able to recall the quotations is only really the first part of being fully prepared for the exam. You also need to be prepared with something to say about it, okay, with some quality analysis. Okay, better analysis means better marks. But exploding quotations is a skill you need to learn and practice. Okay, it's not just something we expect you to know how to do, okay, but it's really, really valuable in helping you prepare for your exams. So the more you practice, the better your analysis will be, and you'll be able to use this skill independently in your own revision. So once you've got your quotation, you need to think about what kinds of things do you need to pick out, what ideas do you need to explode off that quotation. So when exploding your quotations, you should aim to make notes about the sort of things you'd be expected to write about in your analytical paragraphs, in those what, how, why paragraphs. So you need to be thinking about things like the language features or the devices, any keywords, any structural features, foreshadowing, dramatic irony, etc., particularly in a play, any word types or the classifications, so is there a particular adjective that's been used, a verb, a pronoun, any links to the themes or the context of the text, and synonyms. So as a reminder, a synonym is a word which means the similar or same. Why should you write down synonyms? Well, because it helps you think about the links and connotations, so what does that word make you think of? It helps prepare your analysis because you'll be using those synonyms when you're writing about those connotations and links, but therefore it helps you avoid repeating the word from the quotation in your analysis. Okay, so synonyms are really important. So what should an exploded quotation look like? So here's an example. I've taken a quotation from Romeo and Juliet. This is in Act 3 after Mercutio and Tybalt's death, so the real turning point of the play. And Romeo says, "Oh, I am Fortune's fool." So I've got my little checklist there just to remind me of the sorts of things I need to be thinking about. So I'm going to first of all pick out that idea about the personification, okay, implying that Fortune is a person and Romeo is its fool. Then I might think about that word fortune. Okay, I might start thinking about what that makes me think of, the synonyms. Okay, it means luck, it means destiny, it means predetermination. I might also think about that keyword fool. Okay, now that one's an interesting one because as a noun, it means a joker or a jester, which was quite common in Shakespearean times for people to be hired as a jester. Okay, that was their job. They were performers almost for the rich. But as a verb, it means to trick or deceive. So that might be something you think about in your analysis. I might think about where it links to other moments in the play, so that link to the prologue and the mention of fate and star-crossed lovers. Therefore, we've got dramatic irony there as well, because we know that, yes, Romeo is Fortune's fool. He is destined to be unfortunate. Therefore, we've also got that idea to the Elizabethan belief in fate and destiny and Lady Fortuna and how events were predetermined. Someone literally turns that wheel of fortune. Again, suggesting Romeo was destined for misfortune. And then finally, I've got the idea that Romeo thinks he's being victimised by fate, as though it was being cruel. So in all of those ideas, I've picked out those things that I've said you need to look for: the language features, the keywords, any structural features, word types, links to the context, and synonym. And this is something you can do for any quotation from any text. So Romeo and Juliet, or an Inspector Calls, or the poetry, or A Christmas Carol when we get to it. Okay, any text you can do this for. If you prefer something more structured, you could create an exploding quotation grid like this one. Okay, it's got all of the same information, but it gives you a really specific place to put that information, okay, which might help you remember it. Okay, now that you've seen how to explode quotations properly with all the information that you should be thinking about, your task is going to be to explode some quotations that you have not yet done so. So in week 6 of the Romeo and Juliet lessons, there was a huge bank of Romeo and Juliet quotations. Okay, you can find those by clicking that link there, but they're also on the next 2 slides. And you had to explode at least 10 of those quotations using the way that we've been doing it in lesson, okay, which is really similar, just not in the same depth that we've talked about today. Your task now then is to find quotations from that list, okay, from the next 2 slides that you have not yet exploded. Okay, but think about quotations for each of these themes. Okay, so find and explode a quotation for each of these themes. Okay, find a quotation and explode it that links to love. Find a quotation and explode it that links to hatred or violence. Find a quotation and explode it that links to death. Find a quotation and explode it that links to the old versus young. Find a quotation and explode it for gender. And find and explode a quotation that links to fate. Exploding quotations is a skill that you can take to any of your set texts, as I've said many times. So your next task is to find quotations from an Inspector Calls. So find and explode a quotation for each of these themes. So class, so that could be anything to do with capitalism, the social class division, or the rich versus poor. Find and explode a quotation that links to responsibility. That could be something about socialism or social responsibility or actions versus consequences. Find and explode a quotation for age. Okay, the idea of the old versus the young generation, or the Edwardian era versus post-war modern era. Find and explode a quotation that links to gender. So the exploitation of either, the inferiority of women, the protection of women, the misogyny of men, or the contrast between Edwardian women and post-war women. And find and explode a quotation that links to guilt. Who is guilty? Who accepts guilt? Is the inspector a manifestation of their guilt? Okay, in exactly the same way as I've shown you, explode the quotations that link to those themes. Okay, you'll find the quotations on the next couple slides. Now you're starting to build up a bank of exploded quotations, you're ready for the next step. So you need to ensure that you can remember all of these clever things that you have written and will write about these key quotations. And for that, you'll need to create a stack of flashcards that you can use as part of your revision and retrieval practice routine. So this is where you can take what we're doing in your lessons and think about how you can take it forward and use it across a range of different texts. So your flashcards should look something like this. On the front of the flashcard, there is just the quotation, okay, and that will help you recall and remember it as part of that process. On the back of the flashcard are your explosions or your ideas. So you can see there, I've literally just condensed all of those ideas into 3 little points, okay, but it's all the same ideas, all of those things that you want to remember about your quotation. Okay, that's what your flashcard should look like. So your task is to create your own flashcards for the quotations you've exploded from Romeo and Juliet and Inspector Calls. Now you can use any of the quotations that you've looked at this week or previously when you were looking at Romeo and Juliet or Inspector Calls. And it's a task that you won't finish this week because you will keep coming back to it and keep adding to it as we look again at the text and we look at your other set texts as well. So create your own flashcards for these quotations. You can buy flashcards or you can make your own from plain paper or card. Don't forget you can pick up resources from college if you need to, so if you need paper, come and get it. You can also create them on Word or PowerPoint like I've done and type them. You can use colour or image as you like, so if you want to use highlighters or if you want to draw a little picture that will help you remember the quotation, that's fine. But make sure your explosions or your ideas are on there first. Okay, that's the most important thing you need to use as part of your retrieval practice.